Hello and welcome into Taliesin's map. And this is a live stream on a topic that is just occupying my mind this week, something that I'm in the middle of researching and that I'm, discovering new new details about that I find fascinating and that I think, um, this is it's this topic is at the core of what the Celts believed and taught about their concept of the absolute. Okay, so um, as you get to sort of this summit or apex of their esoteric understandings, right, things become maybe increasingly difficult to pin down. At the same time that they become increasingly fascinating, and so it's just, yeah, I think. A lot of this is new material that I'm sifting through, and I just want to put that out there that there's a lot more to try to define, try to discuss. Especially, I want to bring people into, offer their opinions on how they see these pieces fitting together, because this is, of course, this this incredible puzzle that the druids and the bards who carried on their lore have left to us. Um, but there is material in here that is telling some kind of pattern and pointing us toward uh, certain things that hopefully we can understand more and more as we kind of sift this material, right? Okay, so this then is, it's like building on what we've already gone into, what I've already gone into about the names that appear to attach to the Celtic concept of the absolute. And we've gone into a few that I think are really strong and that we can agree on, that people can agree on, that there's a lot of good evidence for, these names representing the Celtic absolute. So, the Brahman concept of the Celts, basically. And those, of course, are first and foremost Breochan, who I've gone into extensively. Breochan of the Tower. He builds the Tower of Brigantia in Spain. And from his sons who emerge from his tower, they are like the beginning of multiplicity, the gods that go into Ireland, and that is a coded creation myth. Going into Ireland is the event of sort of creation. And so because of that, because of the way that story appears in the text at a very crisp kind of seam, right, at the very start of the Sons of Mill, the Milesians section of the Laur Gwala Erin, the Book of Invasions, Breochan is the very first person to appear, and his sons. It's all about the story of his sons and grandsons, of course. And they're going into Ireland. So there's a nice seam there where Breochan is sort of the first point at the beginning of that story. And Breochan forms the very final point of the Gaethel section. So it's like the story of coming down from Noah and successive groups such as Phineas and Gaethel and some other descendants therefrom. And they lead up to Breochan in that section. So Breochan forms the final piece of one. So everything's kind of concluding with him, leading up to him, and then beginning another one. So you can see he kind of represents a seam point in the text. And so this kind of helps you to anchor him as this absolute, as well as the fact that his name is cognate with Brahman. It is etymologically from the same root word as Brahman, by the clearest evidence that we have, of course. This can be demonstrated. And actually, I have a whole stream planned where I'm going to go into the etymology of Brahman and the attributes, the descriptions of Brahman and all of that. But I wanted to do that this weekend as well, a sort of separate stream. But this became more pressing, so I want to go into this first and foremost. And in any case, So you have Breochan there, and then of course he has the two sons who are Dark Ocean, Mirthevnia, and Bila, which means the sacred tree. So he has the two sons who are Dark Ocean and Sacred Tree, which stand symbolically for non-being and being. And so because Breochan is the father of non-being and being symbolically, that also reinforces that he is this absolute. So, but then I argue also that we have another pretty clear example of this, which is Tat and Tavarn, or Tabarn, however that's pronounced, which are, this is, you have to understand what a complicated text and what a complicated overall corpus of texts the Celtic tradition is. It's really incredible how much there is, how much was being sort of synthesized and brought together. And essentially, there are waves of invasions, waves of all these groups, but some of them are repeating information, even repeating sons, repeating mythemes. And as we've gone through it on my channel, of course, we've seen that some of these are sort of like the same god actually appearing in a different guise. Like Parhalon has the same sons as Aver Finn, one of the sons of Mil. And Finn, of course, is this Rudra Odin type. And then you can see that Parhalon actually has these mythemes connecting, showing that he is also the same god type symbolically as Aver Finn. But those are separate waves in this sequence of invasions. You then can look at Phineas Farside and Gaethel Gloss and see that they are consistent with this Rudra type once again, so that he keeps appearing, the same god type appears in multiple guises, right? And same for the Kassarians. Fintan Mac Bakra is the main survivor of the Kassarians, and he once again is Fintan. Of course, he's a form of Finn. So what this shows is that many, we can't necessarily say all, but even if you go into the Fomorians and the Firbolg, they have these Finn connected names prominently in them, even there. So I even have begun to think that even like the Firbolg, they have Ruri, Rudraige, is one of the main Firbolg, and that appears to be like an ancestral sort of a Finn, another Finn name potentially, at least. Okay, so just to give you an idea of where I'm going with this, is that there are multiple waves, but they appear to be bringing together a bunch of traditions, and some of them are different sections of or different versions of kind of the same god myth told in multiple ways. It's almost like the Irish, or this is, the Gaels, they're telling you that this is like their favored god, their highest god, as I go into Mercury of the Gauls is probably this same god, and Caesar says that it's their most worshipped god is this Mercury, and that appears actually to be the Phineas Farside and Gaethel Gloss, these inventors of language and all of that. That's actually you can connect to that. You can see how that is actually a Rudra type, a Finn type god, as I go into in my Mercury of the Celts video, of course, if anyone has seen that. Point is, okay, it's this massive harmonization project, the Laur Gwala Erin and the Celtic corpus as a whole, even. But within the Book of Invasions, the Laur Gwala, you have what appear to be, different waves of invaders, but many of them are actually the same god leading the invasion in a different guise, seen from a different angle, with a different aspect of his kind of being brought to the forefront. With Parhalon, it's him as a culture hero, culture creator, bringing all the arts, essentially, and crafts and skills. With Phineas, Farsight, and Gaethel, it's him as the master of language and the word, right? Of course, they invent and create and perfect language. And then as Fintan, it's the knower, the ideal sort of Shanaki, or keeper of the knowledge. He is the embodiment of knowledge, the salmon of knowledge in himself. And then as Eivor Finn, the grandson of Briochan, who comes with the sons of Mill, that is, or rather, he's the great grandson, but that is Finn as the sort of reborn, on one level lower at least. He's reborn as the divider of earth and sky, this sort of creator, the spear point or sword point of the cutting act of the creation, which divides earth and sky, right? Like when Odin cuts Ymir in half. That is that form. So all these successive waves, it's such an important god to the Gaels, you can tell that it took multiple different strands of story to be brought together, and some of them repeat factors, repeat sons and details. So it makes you wonder, like, maybe these are different traditions about this god type from different regions that were brought together, and they were all so important they kind of are trying to harmonize them. Or who knows how this was treated within a single druidic school. Maybe they discussed, they mystically spoke about this god from different angles to teach what needed to be taught about the creation, about this god. So it's fascinating that we have Briochan, and then we have, Briochan is the absolute. That's potentially even higher than the Rudraic god. But one of the lingering questions is, how much do they overlap? Because of this importance that I've just reiterated, they keep telling the story of the Finn type over and over. And then there are a couple points where we can clearly delineate a seam that shows us, okay, Briochan is a name much more specifically indicating the absolute, kind of beyond being and non-being, above all the gods, sort of some kind of point of unity, of unification, or something like that, right? Or just at least an ultimate power that is underlying all things, the pillar that underlies all everything. And so the point is, there are different strands being brought together, and some of them repeat. So that is also true with Briochan, okay? And that means that when we trace the Tuigen, and the Tuigen are the final wave of invaders, right? And they theoretically are partially descended from some of these waves. Like their genealogy technically shows them being descended from the Nemedians, the Nevid. And so that's another question I want to raise here about that connection to Nevid, whether that is really what's being told, what that means, and all of that. But the point is, if you trace back the Tuigen to what seems to be the clearest seam, you reach these figures Tat and Tavarn, and it seems to be code names for the same absolute level that Briochan represents. Okay, so I'm going to go into this with some examples of texts here, of showing how this is kind of deduced, because this is using sort of a deductive method that has, a few sort of logical principles behind it, I would like to think, but that you can kind of understand that, yeah, you're kind of like bushwhacking, or rather, not bushwhacking is the word, but you're kind of like hacking through all of this this complicated mess of coded texts, and making hypotheses as you go and testing them. So it's not like everything's crystal clear, but at the same time, you can use some deductive reasoning to sort of make the best hypothesis you can as you go along. Okay, so here is one moment. So this is Koala. This shows, okay, what I was talking about with Briochan, also called Bregon. Okay. He is here at the conclusion of the Gaethel sequence. But then also, if I can find gotta find the right page. One moment. So, okay, so I'm saying the Tuigen, right? So, oops, we want to go to we want to go to okay, so the figure that we're looking at is Tavarn, and I've made this argument before, right? If you watch my stream about Indhui and the Great Ignorance, and elsewhere, I've made this argument that you can deduce from these complicated multiple genealogies in the Tuigen section. You can deduce the most likely seam. You're always looking for a seam because you have to. You have to look for a seam in these texts because first and foremost, they lead all the genealogies of the Gaelic gods back to biblical figures. There's clearly a seam where Noah was stitched together with the recognizable Gaelic gods that we know, the Tuigen, right? So it goes with as it's just a principle that you start with, that there is a seam somewhere. So where is it? Secondly, you can kind of use which one of these, where do these kind of genealogies converge the most, and is there an outlier that leads back all the way to Noah that can be kind of questioned and discarded, and where are most of them kind of converging and agreeing, right? And thirdly, which are the farthest back gods that you have clear mythological tales about, that you can say, okay, this figure in the genealogy is a real Gaelic god that we can confirm from other evidence, and we can say, okay, that's not part of the fabricated genealogies. We can keep that one. So those are kind of the concepts that you have to keep in mind. So the way that I then have looked at this is just, this is the key section. It has repeated genealogies going back from the Tuigen gods, right? And so you can see that this is the one going to Noah from Nuada. Nuada is a known, established god. His genealogy is traced all the way back to Noah. And you can see that this is much longer than all of the other genealogical strands that that's talking about here. So that kind of puts this one, a question mark by this one, that we should really examine it. There must be a seam in this one leading from Noah all the way to Nuada. Then if you look at, if you just kind of like read these for yourself, you can see that several of them terminate or end, at either Tot or Tavarn. So if I type Tot here, you can see that this strand goes Nate, then Indhui, then Aldwi, then Tot. This one ends Orda, then Aldwi, then Tot. Down here, it says it terminates at Tot, son of Taborn, who's Taborn, aka Tavarn. And then right below it, Tot, son of Tavarn, the choice of the Tuigen unite. So because this is like the one that repeats the most. Okay, so that's kind of like a flag to help you. Like, this one's repeating the most. It's also terminating and not leading all the way back to Noah. And then our third principle is like, are there any gods that we can kind of really confirm as gods? And essentially, Nate is kind of the farthest back that we can confirm is a god. So Nate here, Nate, son of Indhui, because Indhui is mentioned along with Nate. So these two really are the farthest back you can kind of have actual mentions of within the stories. Like in the Din Shenahas, there is a Din Shenahas about Indhui and Nate, and how Nate has the stone house, the stone house of Nate, and he is in that Din Shenahas. He is called son of Indhui, who is of the North Country and horse breeding peoples. And you can see this if you just Wikipedia Nate. There's information about him as a real god. He has a Welsh parallel, N-W-Y-T-H-O-N. It's like Newton or whatever, also spelled N-A-E-T-H-O-N. He has a probable Spanish parallel or equivalent, which is NATO, N-E-T-O, or N-E-T-O-N, right? Okay, so you know that Nate is basically a real deity, most likely. He's son of Indhui. Indhui also fights in this battle, that's the battle of the Tuigen, in this very section, and he's called, or there's at least another figure named with that same name. He's called Indhui Folt Find, Indhui of the white hair, and his name means, the not ignorant one, or the wise one of the white hair. Okay, so there's a lot suggesting that both Nate and Nate being son of Indhui is real. Indhui is then sort of linguistically tied to Aldhui, because you can see Indhui and Aldhui are variations of a single kind of root word, which is Dhui, right? So they're tied together in some meaningful way. So that tells you that, okay, maybe those are both real, and they're telling you some coded information about their role within this genealogy, and that so you should, it doesn't prove that Aldhui is real, because we don't really have direct support for Aldhui, but it suggests he may be. And then, of course, Tat and Tavarn are where most of these genealogical strands, or rather, many of the genealogical strands either terminate at, someone downstream of them, like Nate. There terminates there at Nate. This one terminates at Nate. Like I said, Nate is also one of the ones where it terminates frequently. But then several terminate at Tat, who is called son of Tabarn. Okay. So if you understand that principle, that is a deductive way of making a hypothesis that maybe Tat and Tabarn are meaningful, and that Indhui, at very least, is almost certainly meaningful, because he is mentioned in the Din Shenahas. His name, there's information about him. His name has this meaningfulness to it, and he's also called Folt Find of the white hair, and Find is also a deity name. So I think Indhui Folt Find is probably a form of Finn. Anyways, okay. So from there, what I did was look at the names Tat and Tavarn. Those became the most standout names. Like, what do these mean? And if I could figure out some meaning from Tat, Tavarn, and also Aldhui and Indhui, why is there this sequence that's kind of popping up as the most frequent end of the genealogy of the Tuigen? And if you look up Tavarn, it appears in it's even on Edil. Okay, so the name Tavarn itself, if you put the right spelling in, let's see, it appears on Edil. Let's see, is it Tabairn is the alternate spelling of it. So you can see that in this text itself, it has a couple different spellings: Tavarn, Tabai, or what was it, Taburn or something. And then if you look at the Irish, this is a translation. If you look at the Irish version, it's spelled even slightly different, and it even gives multiple manuscripts where it's spelled several different ways. Okay, so if you look at the Irish original version, it has a list in the footnotes of a bunch of alternate spellings of this name. Okay, so the point is, Tabairn is an alternate spelling of this, and I'll just show I'll switch over to that in a moment. Okay, here we go. It's going to be a lot of switching around here, but in any case, you can see that this is a real word it appears in the Irish medieval glossaries, and it is a poetic term for the sea. That's what it is. It means the sea. And I looked up the etymology, and it's sort of, obviously like a sort of a disputed or mysterious word, but there is this idea that it may come from a root word like B-E-R or B-H-E-R that means, what was it, like something about boiling or cooking. Okay, so it's like an image of a boiling or cooking waters, perhaps. The waters that are churned look like they're some sort of cooking thing. Okay, so this is another tangent that it could connect back to things like, is Ceridwen's cauldron, is that like an after image of what this highest sea? Are they connecting that poetically? Like the cauldron is is symbolically, that this ultimate ocean in a cosmic, in a symbol within the cosmos or something. You know what I mean? You have like the same sort of thing happening with Havergelmir. Havergelmir in the Norse cosmology is like this well within the sort of within the cosmos, or whatever. And is that like a passageway or an after image of that vaster absolute ocean that sort of precedes everything? Okay, so the point is, at the summit of the Tuatha Dé Danann is a poetic term for ocean. That actually makes perfect logical sense for a creation myth and for an absolute concept and all of that. So I think that has to be taken seriously. Then if you look at Tavarn's son, his name is Tat, T-A-T. Now this is more, I think this is more, there could be more interpretations of that. It's less clear cut. But I think the best argument I've come across myself is that there is this Proto-Celtic or Common Celtic word for dad, which is tatos, or maybe that's the Gaulish form. But in any case, it appears even in like a, I can't remember if it was like medieval. This is something that I need to nail down. This is a tangent. I don't have to establish everything here, but there's like a Welsh, like a Proto-Welsh version where it's like tat or tatos. So the point is, this could be like a fossilized Proto-Celtic word that was like a word for father. That's kind of like the clearest cut thing I think you can draw from Tot, although there are alternate ways to look at it. Okay, because it essentially is in the Proto-Celtic or Common Celtic layer, and popping up in maybe Proto-Welsh or something like that. That is what Tot or Tatos means. And then in the Irish, in the Old Irish and onward, the T, I think, shifts to a D, so that the word for father, begins with a D instead, and things like that. In any case, I don't want to get off on too many tangents, but you can, again, like I said, a lot of this stuff is, first of all, if I'm going to write this all down in a finalized form, there's going to be a lot more specific evidence for things like that. But secondly, there's things that are fluid and worth discussing, that we can discuss more about how to discuss Tot. But after Tot, you have Aldhui and Indhui back to back. What does this mean? And Dhui basically means ignorant, and you can look this up on well, it's actually, let's see if Dhui itself comes up. Okay, yeah, Dhui itself comes up here. It's like, Thaui. There are different ways to spell it, like D-A-O-I. Yeah, okay, and I mentioned this, but yeah, in any case, it means fool, unwise, or ignoramus. So, right, it means like somebody who embodies ignorance, and this is what I've said. And al as a prefix can be, like one of two options, is that it is an intensifier. So it means greatly ignorant, a very great ignoramus. Okay, right? That would be a very direct, literal, and accurate translation, the great ignoramus, would be Alvui. And you can see here, and this supports what I'm arguing right now too. There is this saying which appears in the Cormac's, what is that? Cormac's sayings, instructions, Cormac's instructions to the king, or no, sorry, the instructions of King Cormac Mac Airt, sorry. And the saying is this, which I will pronounce incorrectly, but something like nip, nip, shai, nech, korup, thai, okay? Thoi. And that means no one will be wise till he is first ignorant, okay? This is in the sayings of the king. And I think this encapsulates exactly what I'm arguing, which is that there's this mystical understanding that there is this veil of ignorance that we are born into. Whatever, we begin as the ignoramus, we begin beyond the veil of ignorance, whatever, however you want to say it. And that is the necessary precondition of becoming wise. And what's fascinating is that we have Alvui, right, the great ignoramus. His son is Indhui, the not ignorant. Indhui is literally a negation of his father's name. He's like the exact counter force of his father, negating the ignorance that was right before him, and therefore becoming that wise one. Alvui, then Indhui, is saying the same thing as no one will be wise, no one will be Indhui until he is first Dhui, or ignorant. Okay. So the point is, this makes this is an argument. There are different ways any of this could be interpreted. Okay, I'm not saying like this is an absolute objective fact, but this, I think, I was looking for. This is the summit of where all the Tuigen genealogies are sort of converging. We should try to make sense of it. Okay, we should try to make logical sense of it. We have that Ocean is a clear-cut interpretation. Probably his son means father or something like that. Okay, it could mean something else, but in any case, he has a son who is there, and then I think it means father, and then immediately you have the great ignoramus. Why should the great ignoramus be so high in the genealogy of the gods before all the Tuigen at this summit point? The explanation that I believe in, that I've come across, that I argue for rather, is that the only way ignorance can have that high of a level is if it's this important step in the unfolding of the genealogy of the gods, and it has to have some meaning. That has to mean that before the ignorance there wasn't ignorance, right? So above it has to be preceding ignorance, and after it has to be something has changed, right? The ignorance is making a division. It's making a line. Something significant has happened, and of course we see this in, like, it's not some mystery that this is how other traditions treat their summit of the absolute. So if you have Ocean and Father sitting above ignorance, it makes perfect sense, or it would make perfect sense, that they are kind of two names or aspects of the absolute. And then that the great ignoramus is the line where ignorance enters in, of course, that sort of breaks the unity, breaks the perfection, what have you, of the absolute level. And from after that, the multiplicity of the created cosmos unfolds, and ignorance is the necessary step, the necessary precondition. As this saying makes clear, no one can become wise until you're first ignorant. So that's a necessary first step. And right from there, the counterforce, the great God who embodies wisdom, arises next as the counterforce, sort of the light piercing the darkness. And from him, all the gods can be born as their multiplicity of gods, and all of the cosmos and humans and everything from there. Okay, but this is my explanation. So I've gone into this elsewhere, and yeah, like I said, I don't want to belabor every single point because there's a lot I want to go into. But if this is true, then we have Tot and Tavarn above the line of ignorance. Okay, that whatever's above the line of ignorance is essentially perfection, fullness of knowledge or awareness, whatever it may be. Unification. This above ignorance must be the level equivalent to Briokan, as I've said, right? Briokan is the one who builds the tower. The tower symbolizes that pillar of perfect integrity, totality, strength, power, that is the absolute. And he has 10 or 11 sons, and that represents sort of the multiplicity going out from him. And they cross an ocean to go to Ireland. They're sort of doing that same step of the multiplicity breaking apart from the unity that is in itself passing through the veil of ignorance. Okay, the veil of ignorance is when the unification of and perfection of the absolute turns into, emanates, whatever, multiplicity. If everything culminates in an ultimate absolute, then our perception of everything being divided into multiplicity must be filtered through some kind of ignorance, or at least, or the other way of interpreting it could be just that, everything below this certain line is born in a deficit of knowledge. We don't know everything. Obviously, we don't have. So you have to climb back up through ignorance to reach the fullness of knowledge, and that is represented by the ultimate absolute. Okay, so there are different ways, of course, to look at that. Point is here, this puts Tot and Tavarn in parallel with Briokan, as I've argued. Okay, and I think to me, all of that is debatable, but also it's something that many people could agree on, and I think is very strong that we can establish as a point of departure for the next sorts of things. So from there, what I want to go into is, I would say, more speculative. Okay, that's why I want to frame it this way. I feel like this is a good, strong foundation. But what I go into, it's simultaneously it's more speculative, but also there are details in this next step that confirm what I just said, that Tot and Tavarn equals Ryokan in some fashion. Okay. I should also say this concept of the waters, the ocean, as this level of the absolute is both Indo-European, like Indian, Vedic, and also Egyptian. The Nun, N-U-N, is this, these undifferentiated waters beyond being and non-being that is at the beginning of essentially all of the, I think all of, or most of the Egyptian creation stories. One god or another sort of emerges from the Nun as the creator father, or is himself one with the Nun, and then they differentiate, that sort of thing. So, for example, you have I've repeatedly said that Ptah is very similar to this sort of like Briokan and Brahman type figure. Ptah is this ultimate sort of absolute god, but with a personality, of course, or a persona, a defined character in the myth, mythic traits. But Ptah, in his highest esoteric understanding, in some of the more mystical texts relating to Ptah, he is called Ptah-Nun. That means, Ptah and Nun are like two names that together form the ultimate absolute. Ptah is the one who holds the Jed scepter. The Jed is the column of the universe, exactly like Ptah, has his tower. Well, Briokan has his tower. The Brahman, as I've gone into, has his skamba. Skamba is exactly like Briojan's tower, the Skamba pillar of the universe. Ptah then is shown always holding in his hands the Jed scepter, which becomes the pillar of the universe and even becomes Osiris's spinal column later within the world and that sort of thing. And it is this ultimate symbol of stability and power. And Ptah is depicted as a mummy, but his hands are free. So he's like bound by mummy cloths in a sort of simulation or something of this concept of being bound, but his hands are actually free. He actually exhibits total freedom, even though he is essentially dying. He symbolically dies into the cosmos, into life, because he becomes by sort of like I don't know, his role is to be the essence of everything in the cosmos that he creates. He speaks everything into existence, and it's almost like he is dying into life, from the absolute level, dying into the multiplicity of existence by being that essence who creates, and everything is an emanation of himself, something like that. Okay, and so within that symbolic death, the symbolic mummy wrap, you can see that mummy wrap reminds us of this veil of ignorance, even that that comes between the absolute and the world of multiplicity. It's comparable, at least in its symbolic meaning, and that this idea that his hands are actually free is also a crucial point, I think, because it's like, even though he somehow, wraps himself up in the material world, wraps himself up in the mummy cloths that symbolize this falling into multiplicity, or going into, venturing into multiplicity, his hands are actually in reality still holding the power of the controlling everything, controlling the power of the Jed scepter, all of this. And there are descriptions where the Noon, because he is Ptah-Noon, the Noon is said to be his body, essentially. The Noon is his body, and then his mouth opens up, and the gods who emerge are like his tongue and his teeth and things like this, and he sort of speaks the world into existence, and all of that. Okay, so that's a well-known creation myth, and there are different variations. The point is, when you have Ptah-Noon, that's like this male principle who holds the scepter, and the Noon, the undifferentiated ocean of beyond everything, that is the waters that are like the body of that absolute figure. That, I think, is at least potentially comparable to having Tavarn, ocean, and Tot, one after another, above the line of ignorance, all of them. Okay, so this could be one explanation for why is there not just one figure above the ignorance? Why is there two? It could be that there is this sort of waters aspect and this male fathering principle that they understood to be sort of two aspects, or at least two symbolic names, like two different ways of looking at the same ultimate absolute. So it's hard to say how those exactly related. But you can see that Briojan is much more the masculine figure of the pillar. He's not the waters in himself. So he might be more comparable to what Tot is, potentially. But I think there has to be this understanding that there may have been a mystical understanding of both of them, sort of as the same as each other. Tavarn and Tot may have been two faces of one concept, just like Ptah and Noon may have been. And like I said, this is in the Vedic material. The waters are frequently accorded equivalence with like the highest level, where they're like they are equated with the fourth world, it's called, which is like there's the three worlds of the cosmos. Then the fourth world is like everything that's beyond, and sometimes it's just simplified as being the waters. Other times it's said like to be Brahman, and the waters is put below the Brahman. And there's actually multiple, if you look in the Brahmanas, there's multiple different ways they sort of organize these principles of what is beyond the cosmos of multiplicity, okay, and what is their hierarchy between that. So it's a very common thing in world mythologies to have multiple levels within the absolute, or at least multiple symbolic names that help describe the nature of that absolute, okay, from different angles for our understanding, right? Hopefully that makes sense, and that sort of explains my angle of coming at this. So I for a while I was thinking, the seam between the Tuigen Danan genealogy and Noah and the biblical stuff, and really just wherever between anything else that isn't Tuigen Danan genealogy, I figure the seam must be around Tavarn, right? That would make the most sense from what we just looked at. It makes mythological sense that everything terminates at the waters, because that's similar to the Vedic. It's identical to the Egyptian, that the waters are this ultimate thing. And in Platonic terms, I should say, this is similar to the indefinite dyad is sort of this indefinite. The indefinite is the waters. The waters have this oceanic. They could be endless. They symbolize unlimitedness, and that which has no definition. Then the male principle of the absolute can symbolize what the Platonic tradition calls the limit. And so, there's a lot that could be discussed about this as well. Whether Tot, the father principle of the absolute, and Tavarn, the ocean principle, whether they themselves are directly the limit and the unlimited, or whether they are the precondition for limit and unlimit to even be, or whatever, what have you. Okay, there's different ways that could be interpreted, right? But in any case, they do represent those sort of undifferentiated side and the limiting principle, that which is like a point that what creates the order from that, what creates limit itself, what is the principle behind the possibility of limit at all, basically. And that, of course, can be symbolized by the pillar itself that we've gone into. The pillar itself, although it can be the absolute all in all, it can also, the sort of pillar within the pillar as like a center point with an ocean all around it, is sort of this image of like, a center point, which is like the ultimate limit, and the unlimited, undifferentiated ocean all around it. That's another way to sort of look at this. And so, yeah, that relates back to Briocan once again. Like Ptah, Briocan is a builder. Ptah is a craftsman god as well. So there's this craftsman power latent or obvious in Briocan, just like in Ptah, and that's possibly what's being represented with this name of Tot as well, I think. And let's see, and that comes through with the syllable versus the track of the cow that I went into in Rigveda 3.55.1. It discusses how in the track of the cow, and that's symbolically, the cow is like the feminine principle of, the cow has the liquid, the life-giving liquid within her. The track of the cow is comparable to this endless ocean, perhaps, but it's also symbolically the track of poetry. So it's you can put another symbolic layer on that. This is it is language itself. It is Vach itself. Because Vach is essentially this highest persona of the waters, and she's also speech. So speech and waters blur together. So the track of the cow is the track of the poetic line that represents the cosmos or the absolute itself, perhaps. We are all within the track of the cow in some sense, but then it says, within the track of the cow was discerned the imperishable syllable. This imperishable syllable is the point, the atomic point that defines the line, that puts a stopping point to the potentially endless sprawl of the track of the cow, right? and it is therefore it is imperishable. It has imperishability, kind of like, at least conceptually in our minds. If we think of a smallest unit, um, we are thinking that that is the idea of a smallest unit is an imperishable unit, even if like that doesn't exist, even if that's like a creation of our consciousness. The possibility of the limit itself, by definition, is something that is imperishable. It is derived from imperishability. It is imperishable, and so the point is, the absolute has these two aspects, which are unlimitedness, so like unlimited power, unlimited extent, perhaps. I don't know if extent even makes sense prior to space and time, but unlimitedness. It cannot be limited because it is that which limits. So the absolute is unlimited, but it is also imperishable. Because it is imperishable, um, it is the ability to limit as well, simultaneously. And this is sort of like the mystical paradox that troubles that many philosophers have tried to understand. How does unlimitedness and the possibility of limit, which keeps asserting itself, that is the basis of everything somehow, how do those coexist? How are they potentially two sides of one single coin, or something like that? And so I think that's what's carrying through with Tavarn and Tot, potentially, and is similar to Ptah and the Noon, potentially. But I realized that there's actually like that made perfect sense, and you could leave it at that, I think, with Tot and Tavarn, and still have a good understanding of the absolute, and understanding that parallels what Breochan is doing in his story. But of course, like, once you are on sort of solid ground understanding that, it allows you to see more. It's like you have to take that step to then see more what's going on, which is that I realized the genealogy that goes past Tavarn in the text that I just went into. So I'm going to switch back to the Book of Invasions real quick here. Because there is a generation, of course, before Noah. And is this it? Okay. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Okay, 1 second. So back to our genealogies, right? What you can see is that Noah, like this is the one that stands out as sort of a sore thumb of all of the other genealogies terminate at some pretty clearly, real Irish god, except the ones that go to Tot and Tavarn, who are mysterious. But we can make a logical argument for the fact that they very well, they very strongly, there's evidence that we can support that they make sense as names equivalent to Breochan, especially after you establish Breochan to begin with. Then you sort of are able to say, okay, because we have Breochan, we can say that Tot and Tavarn might very well be doing the same thing. That helps to establish it, of course. These things reinforce as you kind of snowball this information forward. But with this genealogy going back all the way to Noah, I realized that you have Nevid. Nevid is one of the other invasions in the Book of Invasions. And to me, Nevid is perhaps the most mysterious, the most difficult for me to pin down what the heck is going on with Nevid, because the Parholonians began to make sense, Gaethel made sense, Breochan made sense, the Sons of Mil made sense, the Tuigen made sense, the Fomorians make pretty good sense. They obviously connect with Balor, who makes a lot of sense. And the Firbolg even have names repeating that tie them together with other waves and have some potentially Finn-related names like Ruri. But so the Firbolg are pretty mysterious as well, but I think there are some threads we can look at there. With Nevid, his name means, heaven, or, sanctuary, sacred space, these sorts of things, in a literal sense, heaven. And what he's doing, one of the things is that he appears and it, like, almost immediately dies. He does very little. He has a bunch of suns. He clears plains. Some floods burst out of the ground. And he has some battles, and he doesn't do that much that we can like glean a lot from. Okay, so for that reason, he's been very difficult for me to pin down. And I was wanting for a long time to think, he can't be like another Finn. He must be like his own. His name means heaven. Is he the Dagda? Is he Macgrania in a more expanded form of the Diaush type? Because Diaush means sky or heaven. That's a possibility. These are all like open possibilities. Is he something else completely? Is he Nuatha in another form? Because Nuatha is a god of the sky who sort of blazes, the Varuna type, who Nuatha is, blazes sort of a trail with battles, and waters are emerging. He could be that. So all these are possibilities, but the point is that he's mysterious to me. And so in my thinking, all of these different waves, they're oftentimes repeating material. And if they're repeating material, then they don't have a necessary flow. There's a possibility that we have to keep open, that they're being stitched together from different regional traditions, and that the stitching together is semi-arbitrary. Okay, we don't know if it's arbitrary. We have to leave that possibility open, along with it being meaningful, and you have to explore both options, right? So because of that, I just kind of assumed we can kind of set Nevid and his people aside for now, and that could just be a stitched together arbitrarily, his wave of people down to Tavarn, and then there's like a seam, and then stitched on top of Nevid is a link to Noah. Okay, something like that. So I was leaving that possibility open. But what I realized actually is that Nevid's people ends at Baath, or however that's pronounced, Baath, and not at Enda. So here we have Tavarn. After Tavarn is Enda, Enda. And then after Enda is the very last Nemedian, the people of Nevid. And so that was interesting. I was like, wait a minute, there might be, what if once you establish that Tavarn and Tat are this meaningful position, they are above the great ignorance. That means, metaphysically, esoterically, if you're above the great ignorance, you are somehow connected to a face of the absolute, in theory. Once you've established that, then you realize, wait, what if there's more levels? And what if you're missing out on something else going on? It doesn't have to be just one name. If, just like the Egyptians, if they saw there was multiple faces, if, just like the Vedics, they saw sort of multiple levels of principles within the absolute, somehow principles or names, and that are hierarchically linked together. You have this, like I said, in the Brahmanas of the Vedic tradition as well. And those would have been just like important esoteric concepts that they're trying to teach. Like, okay, the absolute, it doesn't just necessarily terminate in one name. There's more. It's the most important thing in some sense. Therefore, there's going to be like multiple angles that we want to teach, that they wanted to teach and preserve about this absolute. And that could imply that there are actually more than just one or two names. There could be more. So you want to really find the seam that has to be going on here. So what I realized is, of course, if the Nemedians actually end at Bath, there's a probable seam right after Bath, and that Enda might be the very first name that's truly within the Tuigen genealogy. Okay, and when I realized that possibility, right, then I was like, okay, well, this is something above even Tavarn and Tat. So therefore, it's like the highest apex of the absolute. If what I'm saying is true, it could be the highest apex of the absolute. So what does Enda mean, right? Well, Enda means it comes from this word ein, en, with an accent on the e, which is it's not shown here, but let's see. What can I? So this name still exists in the wider tradition, and in, for example, the saints and other texts like this, it's a well-known, well-established name. What this means, and it has multiple spellings, Enda, and then also Eanna, Einne, or Endius. Okay, and you can see that it has this accent on the e in its sort of consistent spelling, because it comes from this word en with accent on the e, and that is the word meaning bird. It just literally means bird, and the root word there is en, bird. And the da means something like it is like the nature of, or it is a suffix. It is a suffix meaning that this is like the word overall means bird-like, essentially. Okay, so you can of course look that up yourself. Enda etymology. Okay, the name Enda is predominantly an Irish given name that means like a bird. Okay, and that's an alternate definition right there. But essentially, well, these are interesting other possibilities, of course, as always. But if you derive it from en, as seems to be the most sort of frequent definition, ein dala, meaning like a bird. Okay, and of course, because this is a well-known name, a well-known saint, the meaning of this name has been sort of treated and examined. And so there are established opinions on this, is my point. So that means that this name means bird-like, and it's at the apex of this genealogy of the Tuigen, right before a seam that we can establish between waves. Now, what I found that is fascinating, okay, is that when you go to Briochan, there is another figure sharing this root word of his name. Okay. One moment. I'll pull this up. Okay. So this is the Gavel, and here is where, okay, this is where you really have to get in. If you really want to understand this, you really have to dig into establishing these seams, right? And this is, first of all, a speculative thing that you have to do, but secondly, it's a necessity, and it's very difficult to really cross-check, to really have strong logical reasons and check all the possibilities of how these seams could be working. But there are seams here, and even scholars who have looked at the Book of Invasions will repeatedly say how many seams there are. There's a lot of seams going on, and so we know that Briochan doesn't go back to Noah. So we know there's at least one seam there, but we also have Briochan is, logically speaking, and within the mythology, He appears to be this absolute. But there are a ton of generations before him, even before getting to Noah. And there's a whole wave of Phineas and Gaithel. Phineas and Gaithel have their own tower, the Tower of Babel, and they appear to be Finn types. And some of the mythology of Gaithel, where he gets bit by a snake and turns partially glass or green, is then sort of echoed in Finn McCool's battle with Alan that I mentioned. So in some ways, Phineas and Gaithel appear like they they shouldn't be part. It's like this shouldn't be part of the story of Breokan. The tower is redundant, is seeming like it's repeating or prefiguring the Tower of Breokan. And the mythology around Gaithel is more like Finn McCool. And Finn McCool, it appears as Aver Finn, which is a great grandson of Breokan. So point is, the wave of Gaithel and Phineas it seems illogical. It seems wrong that it should be before Breokan himself. It seems like they've been stitched together. Okay, it seems like there should be a seam even between Breokan and Gaithel and Phineas. And that's reinforced by the fact that Breokan begins his own entire section, which is the Sons of Mil. He's the very first figure, as if he's beginning the entire creation myth there unto himself, of course, right? And secondly, it's reinforced by the fact that Breokan is the ultimate ancestor, the very first point in the pedigrees of some noble people, of some noble families or whatever. The Corco Loigtha, right? The Corco Loigtha. There are like 3 or 4 genealogies that I show in my video, variants of this Corco Loigtha pedigree. They are all slightly different, so it shows they were compiled differently by different people within this tradition, and they all go back to Breokan as the first ancestor, who is prior to the Tuigen gods even. So that reinforces that he really is a starting point. Okay, he should be his own starting point unto himself from Breokan in the Corco Loigtha genealogies. Lu Laufada is descended, as well as his mother Enya, as well as Lugith, and we know Lugith, who is above Enya and above Lu Laufada. Lugith is like the Purusha. So Breokan in that genealogy is very high up. He's the ultimate source. Okay, that reinforces the idea that there's a seam that we need to discover between Breokan here and even the wave of the Gaithels before him. Okay, so the Gaithels lead up to Breokan as like this ultimate point within the story, but there's a seam here where they're trying to tie them together into one continuous story by ending with Breokan, but Breokan is really his own starting point. So that's how they have tied them together. And what I realize is there is a definable seam even within this Gaithel tradition that we can make an argument for. Okay. And that is that plagues, first of all, like the sort of indefinite disappearance of a lineage is one thing that can kind of tell you, like, if a lineage totally like just ends or disappears, you don't know what happens to them, and then another lineage like appears, that's a possible seam. And it doesn't say that they're directly related, okay, or how they're related. That's one possibility. But with Breokan, it says his father is this Bra, however that's pronounced. And Bra, whatever, he is in the lineage of Gaithel. He descends from Gaithel, the family of Gaithel, until Bra the Victorious came. Okay, he's in this lineage of a series. So that doesn't help us very much. Bra itself means judgment, as far as I remember, judgment. So it's like, should judgment really be above the absolute? It doesn't make perfect sense. Like, maybe you could come up with a reason, but it's questionable. It's very questionable whether Bra should be included in this. And we know, like I just went through, we really know there should be a seam. There is a seam between the Gaethel genealogy and Briochan himself. And so what I realized that I sort of hadn't fully focused on, at least before, is that there's a plague immediately before Briochan. Okay, and this concept of a plague that kills everyone, it's a repeated motif in even in the Book of Invasions, that sort of marks divisions between peoples sometimes, and other things like that. Like, for example, the Parhalonians, they all die in a plague, and that ends the Parhalonians wave, and that is a clear seam where then the next wave arrives. Okay, and there might be an offshoot here or there that links things together, but like everyone dies in a plague is a good seam, and they use this trope in multiple places. Nevid himself dies of a plague, but then his sons continue on from him, so the whole wave doesn't die. But then the sons kind of go off to the east and sort of peter out, or like they become obscure. How they connect, what exactly they do, kind of becomes obscure, because then it doesn't tell you. It says that the final son of the Nemedians is that Bath, Baath, but it doesn't say that Bath ever had a son named Enda. Like I said, there's a seam there. You only get that one genealogical story where they're being linked together it seems forced, okay, is what I'm saying, because nothing in the actual narrative tells you that Bath had the son Enda. So it's a possibility that there was a real story connecting those. Okay, I'm not saying there wasn't, but it's a seam. That's another seam where like the lineage kind of peters out. It doesn't tell you who their next son is. And the other way is that they're like a plague can come up. Of course, a flood killing everyone, or a plague killing everyone, like those, like a flood or something. That's pertinent to Fintan and how that ends. Or Fintan being chased off by the women, and in any case, everyone dies except Fintan and the women. And then the women chase Fintan into the waters. That's like another sort of nice potential seam. But like I said, the Parhalonians, that whole wave ends with a plague where everyone just dies off, essentially everyone. And it tells you there's a seam. Well, there's actually a plague at this sort of point right before Briochan, where the Gaethel family genealogy should be sort of ending. Suddenly there's a plague, and it says it was after the sinister battle. So they're battling, they're having their waves of people, or their generations of descendants from Gaethel. It was after the sinister battle that there came to them a plague of one day. The people of the ships of the sons of Alot, without fault, were all dead except 10 persons. So some people survive, okay, that's fine. But this plague motif, it can be telling you that there is a potential seam, right? Now, who comes out of this plague? Un and En came out of it, 2 noble sons of the strong chieftains. Thereafter was Briochan born, father of Bila, the strong and raging. Okay, so this is the key stanza, because right when Briochan emerges, there was a plague that killed everyone right before him. Okay, this should be screaming out to you that this is sort of a red flag. But there's 2 names right before Briochan, and what are they? Un, however that's pronounced, and Ain. And I looked into the Irish version of this text, which I could pull up on the screen right now. I'm just like running out of time because everything takes forever to explain, unfortunately. But I can confirm 100%. If you can look in the archive online yourself, I believe. Okay, I don't know which part. There's like 4 or 5 parts, volumes of the Laur Gawala Aaron, the Book of Invasions, and you can read the Irish version of this text and the English side by side with it on the subsequent page. You'll have the Irish, then the English, and on this page, on this exact page, this name Ain has an accent over the E, meaning that it is the word bird, Ain. So this 100% is the same root word name as Enda. So let me reiterate what we're looking at. Um, Immediately before Tavarn and Tat, we have Enda, and then a seam where the generations do not connect. Enda does not connect in the narrative to who is listed before him in the generation, which are the Nemadians. And that name, it means birdlike, the birdlike. And when you then go over to his probable parallel, Breokan, the name immediately before him, following right after a sort of seam trope, which is the plague killing everyone, is Ain, the exact same root word as Enda, right? Meaning bird. So, okay, so you have two, and then I should say, along with this, what is the other person paired with Ain? It is Un, and Un, it means one. It means one, of course, connecting to things like unity. What this would mean is that if we read this symbolically, how does the concept of one have meaning in relation to the absolute? Well, it describes its nature. Okay, right? It's like you can extend Ain to Enda, and that would mean bird-like, and you can extend Un to oneness, one-likeness. So essentially, it seems to me that these two names that precede Briocan are two labels, two mystical descriptions of the nature of that absolute that Briocan represents. Okay, so that it's the same sort of concept with Enda, where Enda's name means the bird-like, and that describes the nature of the absolute as a whole in some sense. Okay, it's like the nature underlies the absolute as it appears in some sense. Okay, so like yeah, the nature is what's at the bottom, or at the underlying layer of everything is the nature of that very thing. Okay, and the nature being described here is that it is one, Un, and that it is Ain, bird-like, just like Enda. So when you put these side by side, you have a really strong case, in my opinion, that Ain or Enda, which are the same root word, that they are reinforcing one another as evidence that this was not sort of an accidental appearance, okay, of this word here, but that it actually, these are such, you can see there are such divergent traditions within the Celtic material. Like they each preserve very different material. They tie in different ways. They're telling their story quite differently. Yet at the same time, they have this same word right at this apex, right above the name for the absolute. You have this name, this other word meaning bird or bird-like. So this, I just like, to me, when you have two things completely separate, and it's like, I found that Enda in the one thing, and there's a seam right there. The fact that there's another version in the exact, what I say is the exact parallel of that, it's like that, it's like strong predictive power that this is meaningful. It's like reinforcing evidence, however you want to explain that. And then you have right there with it the word meaning one. That's very interesting, obviously on its own. It's reinforcing that, I think, that oneness, or some sort of concept of unity is a feature of the nature of this absolute, this Briochan. Okay. Okay, what else can we say about that for now? Hopefully that makes sense, because this opens like an entire interesting window, an interesting pathway to explore. What does the bird-like mean? Why is it that the bird-like, the bird nature, Ain or Enda, is this summit, this apex of the absolute that seems to be described, the word for its sort of underlying nature, if we're interpreting this correctly? Why is that? It's extremely, evocative and fascinating thing to find. It's like you turn over the name of the absolute in two cases, and underneath you see the birdlike. Like, that's fascinating. And there are so many things that this could theoretically connect to, I think. But I do want to say that, okay, well, let's just go straight to Enda of Erin, because, like I said, this name Enda, it does appear elsewhere in Irish tradition, and there's a narrative connected to Enda of Erin. So Enda of Erin is this Irish saint, and here he is. Okay, so what is both fascinating and difficult with this is that you're getting into much more Christianized material. I would argue that because we have Enda and Ain in two entirely separate strands of the Leabhar Gabhla Éireann, told quite differently, but they're still in the same equivalent spots. That's sort of like really, it's a really strong argument that this was authentic material, that Enda wasn't shoehorned in there, and then Ain shoehorned in the other one separately, but not called Enda, just called Ain. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense that these were shoehorned in at the top of the genealogies, even though you have to leave every possibility open and investigate each one. Like, there's one possibility that Enda was just shoehorned in at the top of the Tuigen genealogy, and obviously you have to be aware of that, and I'm aware of that possibility. But the flip side makes more sense of all of the material, I think, because, like I said, it's appearing in these very divergent variants of one another in these different ways. And then when you go to Saint Enda, you can find more sort of narrative material that might be relevant to what we're talking about. But of course, this is hazardous, like I said, because this is much more Christianized material. And it seems to me like it's very possible a lot of what Saint Enda does is being borrowed heavily from other stories of monks and Christianized tropes and things like that. That's very possible. So everything's sort of up in the air and a bit questionable. But the question that I ask is, why are these particular types of stories, even if some of them are Christian, why is this particular character being attributed to this figure Enda? Is there something about his underlying character, the original pagan Gaelic figure Enda, or the birdlike nature of the absolute? Is there something about that was drawing these particular types of stories to him, even if some of them are Christianized, right? What can that tell us potentially about what the original was like? And so what Enda is that he is considered, first of all, the father of all Irish, Gaelic, what have you, how is it described? The father of all Irish monasticism is what it says. Or, see, the patriarch of Irish monasticism. Okay, that's fascinating because that implies he's like the beginning point, the patriarch or father, just like Enda is the beginning point, I'm saying, of all of this cosmogony. So that's interesting on its own. He's in that prominent of a position within Irish monasticism. But secondly, he's like this extreme example of asceticism and having no wants or needs. In that sense, essentially like free from all desires, attachments, that sort of thing. This sort of exemplar of the sort of religious mystic or ascetic, right? So he embodies that to the utmost extent, where the description of him and his monastery is that, they are not allowed to have, or they don't have fire even, because it's almost like they're expected to have the internal fire and nothing external. They don't rely on the externals. They have the internal fire from their love, from their devotion to God and that sort of thing. And so Enda is embodying that principle in a way that virtue. So that's interesting on its own. There's a story about Enda dividing up the Isle of Arran, or at least his monastery there, into like 8 portions or something like that, which is interesting in a sense because he's doing this act of division. He's making order there, which is exactly what the version of the Irish Absolute Trefulniath Treocher does. He's the one who brings the principle of division to the world, to Tara, and gives it, essentially gives the instructions of dividing Tara to Fintan, right? So Enda embodies that role in his own little monastery here. That's interesting on its own. Okay. And he also does certain magical. There's other things you can read about. They sleep in stone cells. They ate together in silence. So he embodies silence. That's actually pertinent, which I'll go into. And of course, he is tonsured he is shaven headed as a monk, which I think his full life, which is, it's okay. Some of the texts are like hard to pull up right now, but yeah, he obviously he becomes a knight and becomes tonsured as a knight, or sorry, a monk. But he doesn't begin as a monk, which is interesting. He begins as a warrior prince, and one of the interesting things is that his sort of change to a monk, it's reminiscent of the Buddha. Okay, so I'm not saying that this is the Buddha. I'm not Buddhist myself, but it's interesting as a comparison, and it makes you wonder. Like, there's a couple options. It's just completely coincidental, or there's a deep Indo-European story type like this, where the vision of death and decay, or whatever, misery, converts someone who becomes the ultimate embodiment of the absolute principle. Okay, that's possible. Or the third option is that this was its own Christian tradition, which is that people were converted to worshiping God by seeing dead bodies in certain instances, in a completely separate, coincidental sort of Christian tradition that was being applied to Enda to exemplify this sort of trait of Enda. Okay, so that's possible too. So the different ways, but it's interesting. You see, he begins as a soldier who's a prince. He's actually a prince, just like the Buddha is a prince. Fascinating, right? It's kind of eerie. And some of Finn McCool's material reminds of the Buddha sitting under the tree. Finn establishes the tree that people sit under to gain prophecy by fasting, when they fast under the tree, just like Odin fasts under the tree. Okay, so there's these like threads that are interesting. Like, maybe there was a deeper original body of this type of lore, which the Buddha was drawing from, and that is coming through with Enda. I don't know. I don't want to push that too far, because I think a lot of this stuff is Christian tradition that's being magnetized to Enda because the underlying Irish figure exemplified certain traits that were then being converted to the Christian version of that. Okay, and so the line is difficult to establish. Okay, but the story is, he was a prince. When his father died, he was succeeding him as king, and he went off to be a soldier. He was a successful soldier, but then he was converted by his sister, an abbess, Fonka, and he visited her, who tried to persuade him to lay down his arms. He agreed if only she would give him a young girl in the convent for a wife. He renounced his dreams of conquest and decided to marry. The girl she promised turned out to have just died, and Fonka forced him to view the girl's corpse, to teach him that he too would face death and judgment. Faced with the reality of death, and by his sister's persuasion, Enda decided to study for the priesthood. So he becomes shocked by this vision, by seeing before him death, the full extent of death and decay, and he completely drops being a prince and becomes the purest, most austere ascetic, who cuts himself off from external needs, essentially, and has the internal fire to sustain him instead. So there he took monastic vows and was ordained. And yeah, so Feng Ka is obviously an interesting name. It raises the question: is she a survival of the feminine aspect of the absolute, or a principle within the absolute that could be worth exploring, right? So that's another thing to look at. I think there are potential. Well, the name itself is hard to etymologically understand. So if anyone has ideas, there is a connection to a concept of like the word that means scald crow, which of course is Morrigan reminiscent, but this is also vague, and it's not the type of thing, I don't like to make establish things without more evidence than that. But there's this lingering element here where the feminine, the female, is the one who causes the male here to become what he is going to be. Okay, so is that an interplay of the feminine and masculine within the absolute? It's something interesting to think about. Okay. Referring back to whatever the original Irish version of this story would have been, that was then changed into a Christian saint story, of course. As we know, many saint stories are pagan stories that were converted like this. Okay. Let's see. So there's different stories about him that you guys can look up yourself, and I recommend reading through this. Finian of Clonard is associated with him, who is with him for a while and then leaves, I think. He has one or two sacred wells. He has a tower. There is a story about land division that makes this other figure named Brecon upset. And Enda prays for divine intervention and makes Brecon become stuck in the sand. So he somehow he has power over other people to make them become, to stop them, to make them become, I don't know, is that the power of the limit that he wields in himself, perhaps? I don't know. But Brecon, I think, means like speckled or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And so yeah, I wonder if speckled refers to sort of the mixture, the world that is mixed, the mixture world, and Enda is like the pure absolute, and he's having power over the speckled mixture of the world. So that's one reading you could pursue or think about. I don't know if that's true. There's another story where he does a miracle where he prays to God, or somehow he makes all of these barrels and food fly through the sky from the mainland to his island. Okay, it's interesting. But in any case, right, Finian and Saint Enda found a monastery together. Where did it say? Finian. So this is an interesting thing, because how do we connect this? Finian of Clonard. Okay, this other Finian, he's like the other father of monasticism. And we want to explore the question of how is Finn and the absolute related or interrelated? Is Finn just below the absolute, an aspect of it as the divine mind is one aspect? Or is Finn sometimes the face equivalent with Breochan? Is that true or not? Yes or no. I'm not saying one way or the other. It's something to explore. But here you have Finian and Enda side by side, and they're both kind of the fathers of Irish monasticism together. But what's interesting is Finian is born. He's born as named Lochan. And I think it's this. Well, it could be a different Finian. Okay, I'm gonna find the path here. But there's one of these Finians, and I think it's this one. His birth name was actually Lochan, Lochan, this becomes interesting because there is more Enda material that exists that we can look at to try to understand who Enda was originally, which is what we want to know. Okay, so this is from The Bird is a Universal Psychopomp. Yes, that's true, and that's true. That's part of this story. Absolutely. So the question, this is interesting, and this is kind of what I'm building to if I have time to go into it today. Maybe I'll go into it tomorrow. I don't know. But like the bird-like, I'm saying, is like the pinnacle, the apex of the absolute itself, like the underlying nature of the absolute. The Celts are telling us is one, and it is the bird-like. Underlying nature of the absolute is the bird-like. So understanding what that means is important. And I think within the world, that nature expresses itself in lower birds, in lower psychopomps and all of that. But it's like it all leads back to the summit bird, like the summit bird-like nature. Okay, so the bird-like nature that is the absolute is the highest, is higher than the birds who are psychopomps, but they are connected. Okay, they flow together. The soul is like a bird, and all of this. Okay, so I'll try to touch on that. Okay, where was I? I'm going to pull up another document here. Because we have this story. Yes. We have this story of the Korah. The Korah. That means they are the children of Korah or descendants of Korah. That's interesting on its own. Is that so? Some of these things, again, if you were dealing with the name that appears to be the summit of the absolute, it's most likely that any of his fathers or grandfathers are probably fabricated. His connection to them is probably fabricated. There's probably a seam there, right? But you don't know for sure. So you don't know if there's meaningful information being conveyed when it says that this Ena is one of the Korah, one of the descendants of Korah. I don't know if there's so many tangents you could go into that it's a lot of fun, but we won't be able to tackle every single one. But in any case, the other big instance where we have the name, a variation of the name Enda, is this Ena, and as we saw in the Wikipedia of Saint Enda, there are variations of that name. I hopefully everyone saw, and that that Ena, E-N-N-E, is just a variation of Enda. Okay, there's different ways. You can see that the root word there, it's still this E-N, and spelling in these manuscripts varied widely for this very same word or name. Okay, but Enda is one of three brothers in this instance. That's interesting. Because the two other brothers are Lochan and Sylvester. So you have to first of all ask yourself, like, are these three brothers three aspects of the same deity? Or are they, that would be like Odin, Vili, and Ve, are Odin, Heinir, and Lothar. They are most likely three aspects of one deity, in my opinion. Or is this like three separate deities names that are performing different functions, as you would see with like Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, or something like that? Okay, those are like the Godhead in themselves with these three aspects of the Godhead. Is that what's going on here or not? What pushes me toward thinking they are three names of the same thing is the fact that Ena is this highest name of all. Okay, it's in our two examples that we saw, it's the apex of the absolute, which probably describes the nature of that absolute. It's very hard for that to be one of multiple gods who are in a parallel position to it. So anyways, this is something that I'm not saying a definitive answer on that, something to discuss and debate. But there's a possibility that these are then three parallel names of one and the same. Like maybe Lokon and Sylvester should be considered as names of Enda. I don't know, or linked to him. Because Lokon is actually the birth name of Finian, as I mentioned. And I'll try to find which Finian that is. I think it was Finian of Clonard, but in any case, Lokon, and there is an article that I was reading about Enda and all the variants of Enda, and the author was arguing that Lokon appears so much with Enda, and appears in a bunch of different place names that appear to combine Enda and Lokon into one word in different variations, things like that. That he was arguing that he was saying that Lokon is the alter ego of Enda. That's interesting if true, because like I said, Lokon is the birth name of Finian. It opens this possibility of a continuity with the name Finn, whether or not that is true or not. Okay, so something to hold up in the air. But that's an interesting possibility because Sylvester means of the woods. Sylvan means the woods. Sylvester means one who dwells in the woods, essentially, wood dweller. And Sylvester is essentially a equivalent or cognate of the name Gwydion, right? Widdicus. Widdicus could be translated into, a Latinate name as Sylvester, just like Sylvanus is the Roman name, meaning essentially an equivalent thing. Whether or not Sylvanus is the identical deity, I'm not saying that. It may or may not be, but it means the same thing, and it's just what the word means. So it opens the possibility that Sylvester is like a Gwydion type, but Gwydion, aka Cian, is aka Finn. Gwydion slash Cian is a form of Finn because Cian is called Finn MacKinnelly. Okay, so this is like an interesting tangent that you can investigate, and you can wonder to yourself whether Lokon and Sylvester are aspects of Finn, and whether they are aspects of Aina, and is Aina consistent with like the highest point of Finn, or is Aina a higher thing than that? Okay, I don't want to say for sure because I still think it's possible that they're maintaining a distinction where the absolute is its own thing, and then Finn is the expression of the mind of the absolute, the mind of the cosmos, rather, whatever, the God who is the nous. That's possible. But there is also this possibility, like when I look at Phineas Farsythe, you have somebody builds the tower, it's just like Nimrod or whatever. There's a version of that. There's so many fascinating tangents. I'm going to try to not overwhelm and flood everything, but you have Phineas. He comes to the tower, so he's there, and it says at that time only one language was known. That means everything was unity. He is there before the tower gets broken. The breaking apart of the tower, or the breaking apart of the languages, is of course the breaking into multiplicity. Phineas then appears like he is a face of the absolute itself, under a Rudraic, under a Finn aspect, because Phineas is continuous again. As I go into in my Mercury video, it is continuous with these concepts around the Fionn, the warband of Finn, as well as connected to Gwydion, and then his own grandson, Gaethel, who emerges afterwards. It then says that then Phineas's son, Nail, comes to study the languages there. And then he studies all the languages. That means there's like multiple languages at that point. So that's like multiplicity is already happening. And Nail could mean like mist or cloud. Okay, that could be a cloud of similar to what we've been discussing, which intervenes and multiplicity is emerging in languages. And then Gaethel emerges as the lower Finn type once again, because Gaethel is linguistically connected to as well, to the same figures. And Gaethel has recognizable mythology that is identifiable with Finn McCool and with the Vedic Rudra that I've gone into elsewhere. And so the point is, like, does Phineas being there, like, before the breaking up of the pillar, does that the Tower of Babel, does that describe a moment where the Finn type is a face of the absolute on that level? Is that being reinforced here? I don't know, but it's something that has to be investigated and taken seriously, I think. And does this connect with that? Lochan, Enda, and Sylvester. Are these Is Sylvester telling us that the absolute is connecting to the wood dweller deity? That it's an aspect that he can be described as the wood dweller. And then Lochan, I think the most clear etymology connects it to a word for splendor or light, and then with the an ending. So lock, of course, like lock can be like a lake, but if it has an accent on the o, it means bright. Okay, if you can look at that up on Edil, just type in lock. It means bright or splendor, bright, light, or splendor. If it has an accent on the o. Okay, so that's probably what Lochan means. I doubt he means the lake one, but in any case, okay. What else can we say? What's interesting is, you can go. There's a whole bunch of things that you can go into from this point. Okay, that I want to reiterate. First of all, is the Welsh Dunwall Moelmud, or Milmud, or what is it? Moelmud. Dunwall Moelmud is the father of Belimar. And I've said that Belimar is probably the same as Bila. Bila is Prajapati. Bila is the son of Breochan. As we just saw, it says Breochan, father of Bila. And then Belimar is probably the Welsh equivalent. There are manuscripts where the names are like Beli is spelled Bila, or Bila is spelled Beli, something like that. And if you actually look up Beli, if you look up, Beli, like Beli or Belios, or rather, okay, if you look up what is the etymology of Bila, the Irish Bila, it is actually like Belyos. So let's look that up, actually. Okay, Albanian, French. Okay. So Irish. As you can see, the Proto-Celtic root of Bela in Irish is actually Belyon, Belyos, Bolios, etc. So you can see how that can definitely, it very much could be connecting to Beli, Beli in the Welsh, or at least there could be like Belly, whatever the root of belly is. It could be being confused with, like a wordplay with, whatever the case may be. Mythologically, belly is in the same position, I would argue, as Bila in the Irish, and the father of belly is Dunwall Moelmud. Okay, Dunwall Moelmud appears in the, what was it? Okay, let's see. Geoffrey of Monmouth, yeah. I'm going to pull that up. Right here. Monmouth. So this is interesting because because there's a battle and a plague and the end of a previous lineage right when Dunwall Moilmood emerges. Okay, it's the exact trope that we went into, reiterating what I'm trying to get across. Okay, that this is kind of how a seam is established, and it lines up so that Dunwall Moilmood is probably the same as Breochan, and therefore is the same as Enda / Tot. Okay, and what Dunwall, I think, can show is that Enda and Tot / Breochan, they should be seen as faces of one another rather than like separate figures entirely. You can see that Enda, that there is Tot, then Tavarn, then Enda. It's like 3 levels, and that is all accurate and true. They're symbolic levels that are important, but they can be seen as 2 faces of one in that sort of way. And that if you compare to the Welsh version, Dunwall Moilmood seems to have the traits of both of them combined in himself in a way, arguably. Okay, I would say so. So that's the kind of idea I'm getting across. Let me see here. Okay, I want to just show you this seam so you can see how consistent and interesting this is. Here's where Dunwall Moilmoutius, that's aka Dunwall Moilmood, it's the same figure in Latin, appears. He appears right down here. But right before him, we see the preceding dynasty going back to the Romans. I think essentially I forget which Roman general or something is the progenitor of this lineage, but in any case, this lineage terminates at this figure named Porrex. Porrex was spurred into by covetousness. But first, right before that happens, in his father's time, a rain of blood 3 days and a great swarming of flies was there, whereof men died. After him, his son. Okay, after him, Lago. Okay, there's some rains of blood. It's starting to look ominous and bad. 2 sons were born, Ferrex and Porrex. But when their father began to verge upon eld, a contention arose betwixt the twain as to which should succeed him in the kingdom. Howbeit Porrex spurred on thereunto by a more grasping covetous, layeth snares for his brother with a design of slaying him. Whereupon Ferrex, when the matter was discovered unto him, betook him across the channel into Gaul. In the battle between them, Ferrex was slain together with the entire host that accompanied him. Thereupon their mother, when she learnt the certainty of her son's death, was beyond measure troubled, and conceived a bitter hatred of the other, for she loved the one that was slain the better of the twain, and so hotly did her wrath blaze up by reason of his death, that she was minded to revenge it upon her brother. She accordingly took possession of the tent, and setting upon him with her waiting women, hacked him all into little pieces. Thenceforward the people was sore afflicted by civil war for a long space, and the kingdom was governed by 5 kings, who harried the one another, which with mutual forays wherein was much blood spilt. At last, in after days, arose a certain youth, renowned above all others for his singular prowess, by name Dunwallo Moilmoutius. Okay, so the point is, there's a little bit of plague, a little bit of a rather rain of blood, ominously. Then there's this dynasty tears itself apart with internal strife, and then there's like a civil war that intervenes, just chaos. So this is the warring. There's just warring groups. That's like this. That to me, and that is a Roman lineage traced directly from the Romans, ending with this Porrex, and that lineage just is terminated right there. So you can see that if this is Gaelic mythology, there has to be a seam between the Gaelic mythology and the Romans, and the Roman genealogy terminates right at this exact point, and then Dunwall arrives. Dunwall is then the father of Belimar, and then all the gods. So it's a pretty easy seam to establish, and it reiterates the pattern that we just saw with Briochan. There's a seam, there has to be some kind of seam, and then like a plague or a war, internal strife just obliterates them. And then from that just emerges the first figure of the next mythology wave, however you want to think of it. And here it is, Dunwallo Molmutius. Okay, Dunwall Moelmud is the Gaelic, or sorry, the Welsh version, the Celtic version, and that means the world king Dunwallo or Dunval means it's like Donal. It's the same as Donal. It means world ruler, world king. And Molmutius means, or rather, Moelmud means Moel means bald, shaven-headed, like a monk, and Mud means silent or mute. It's the word mute, so entirely silent, right? And this is stated in. This is stated even in the Wikipedia for him. It says Dunwall or Duvnal Moelmud, meaning Duvnal, the bald and silent. Okay, so that's what it means. He's the bald and silent world king. Well, world king, first of all, it's a perfect description for the absolute and for Briochan, if you will. But it's also telling you that he's bald and silent. And that is a description of an ascetic and a druid. Okay, right? Because, first of all, druids would be shaven-headed, apparently. And Finn McCool is a plague, actually like a sickness, an illness, some kind of plague thing, afflicts him when he's a boy, and they shave his head. He gets a nickname that he is Moel, the same word in Irish. Avergin, who becomes the chief druid and is a counterpart of Finn, another name, another aspect of Finn, Avergin. He has a nickname which is Iron Guineach, something like that, and it means shaven-headed with like iron. I forget exactly the logic in that word, but it means like your head's been shaven by iron, by a blade, I think. Okay, so in any case, Avergin and Finn McCool are both shaven-headed at one point, in some sense, because they're like reiterating this, where druids would have this tradition of shaving their head, and this points to the fact that they're kind of connecting themselves to the absolute, to this quality of the absolute that appears in Dunwall Moelmud. Dunwall Moelmud is bald and silent. To me, this is always read as being like without attributes. Like the Brahman is often described as pure, like purity of the absolute means that it is without attributes because it's beyond all attributes. And in that sense, it is shorn of attributes. It is bald. It's completely, we can't. It's this negative theology concept where we can't attach worldly attributes to what is transcendent of the world. All our language fails, and in that sense, it is free. It is liberated. It is above and controlling attributes, so it is not controlled by them. They do not attach to it, and in that sense, also silent. It is beyond. These are symbolic descriptions of what is beyond and transcendent. Okay, and but they are also the traits that are embodied by the mystical ascetic, and by the monk, and by the druid. Right, the baldness of the druid's head or the monk's head, and their silence. This is also an attribute. It connects. There's this back and forth between the human embodiment of the highest traits of and the absolute concept itself, where the sort of the ideal mystic is embodying that absolute in himself, and so therefore, there's a mutual back and forth with these traits. And so I think that is pertinent because that's how Enda of Erin is described, right? He is tonsured. His people, they're all bald monks, but he also is practicing silence, as we went into in his Wikipedia. He is, he is like, part of his asceticism is the practice of silence, even. That's just fascinating to me because it connects back to Dunwall Moelmud, right? Okay, so that's what I wanted to get across. But also, Dunwall Moelmud is a world king simultaneously. He's not just a world separating ascetic, but he is also like a warrior, just as Enda was a warrior to begin his story. Enda begins as a warrior, and then in his full sort of fulfillment, he becomes the transcendent ascetic symbol. Dunwall kind of is both in his name. His description of it that is contained in his name has these features that are similar to Enda, but he's also the world king. He's much more of a ruler, like Breogan is. Also, he is the codifier of the standard units of measure. Okay, if anyone has been following what we've been going into recently, this is exactly what you would find with the absolute, because that's exactly what I was describing with Trevolniev Treocher. Treocher means that he is the one of the three-edged stone, the three edges. Treocher means three edges, and it describes this particular stone which Finn McCool wields, and he loses it in the water and all of that. But the three edges imply the triple, like the power of distinction, the power of making distinctions is fundamentally triple. Okay, in a sense, is what that kind of means. And the word for distinctions is deocher. It's just the edges, which is the word eocher. The word for distinction is just the word for edge with a D at the beginning, deocher. Okay, it's a very interesting interplay of those two words, because the three edges are what make the distinctions, and this distinctions themselves are the deocher. And of course, Trevolniev, in his story of the settling of the Manor of Tara, he comes to Tara to be the one to proclaim, he tells Fintan how to make the distinctions, how to make the divisions of Ireland. So it is like Trevolniev, who is this. Trevolniev is, again, another name that just encompasses the absolute. And he is the one who brings the power of divisions. And that's exactly what Dunwall Moelmud is. He is the lawmaker, but he codifies the standard units of measure, even more importantly. So that is fascinating. It's like, he is above and beyond distinctions. He is above and beyond things that can bind him and make him unfree. That's kind of the concept. But he is then, because of that, he is the power that makes distinctions. Okay. The power that makes distinctions cannot itself be subject ultimately to distinction, because it has to be the preceding ground of that. So it's a paradox, but it is sort of the way this is understood philosophically in Platonism and other places. Right? Okay. But in any case, you can see that he embodies being the king and the warrior and having the ascetic qualities unto himself, and being the measure, the root of measurement. So I think you can see a good summary. You can see evidence that Breogan and Trevolniev and Enda are different name, and even Tat are probably just different names of one and the same thing that Dunwall kind of sums up in himself. Okay, that's my argument. From there, I'm going to run out of time, and I'll have to do a part 2 of this, I guess, which will be fun. But I'm going to look at my notes here to see what I wanted to touch on before we run out of time. Because with this we have the evidence of Enda of Aaron. That's a good basis. It gives us some ideas, which we can then reinforce by looking at Dunwall Moilmood. And the things that yields, that reinforces, are these ideas of being the bald, silent one who is sort of beyond. He embodies sort of ultimate freedom and power because he is not bound by anything, right? And that is sort of the ascetic, mystic ideal, right? Like I said, that is similar to the Buddha is a very clear example of that concept. Not saying that it is completely equivalent, but it's a good reference point. And that makes him the king of everything. It makes him the world king. Briokan and the word Brahman itself, essentially, as I'll go into in a future stream, its ultimate sense is like power and strength. That it is the power, the productive power, as Plotinus will say about the one. It is productive power of everything, of the cosmos. So by being beyond these definitions, distinctions, it is then the power that is underlying all things as the pillar that is holding up all things. That is the other meaning of Trevolniev. Trevolniev means the triple support, triple supporter, like a pillar. And just like the pillar of the Tower of Briokan and all of that. Okay, so yeah. To be that pillar, there has to be this underlying unrestrained power, and the power being unrestrained, it has to be not sort of subject to the distinctions of the world that are like bindings on it. Okay, so that it sort of enter like Ptah, it can enter into the bindings of the mummy cloth of the world, but its hands are free. Its hands are ultimately free, and so I think that all points to that. To me, that points to the symbol of the bird-like, which Enda's name contains. It points to that, the underlying meaning having something to do with the unrestrained freedom of the power of the absolute, right? Unrestrained, like the bird is symbolic of sort of an unrestrained freedom, I think. Secondly, like possibly the witnessing eye of the bird, the witness of all, the indwelling subject in some sense, maybe. That's a direction that the Vedic material definitely takes this in, okay? Which is, we have some Vedic reference points that I want to draw this to, which are, first of all, okay, where's my little, sorry, I apologize for the sort of rapidity of this, but there's so much I want to just talk about that. That's just the way it is. That's just the nature of this subject. And if you don't bring it all together simultaneously, you can't build the bridge to understanding it, I think. So it has to be kind of done in that way, and it's just inherently challenging to communicate. So thanks to everyone who's coming along this journey. Hopefully you're getting something out of this. But yeah, Rig Veda 4.14.5. Let's try that. Right, so this is, of course, I've gone into this before, and this is the Svadhyaya of the Brahman. The Skamba of heaven is defined as, this is one of like two of our clearest sort of key words or definitions of the Brahman in the Rig Veda itself, and in the earliest layer of the Rig Veda as well. Because, of course, the Skamba appears as an obvious symbol of the absolute, the Skamba of heaven, in the Atharva Veda hymn to the Skamba, 10.7 of the Atharva Veda. But it appears in the Rig Veda in two back-to-back hymns saying the same things. It's not just one hymn; it's two that say this. They're like almost identical lines. I think it's like, oh wait, that's what am I? Okay. Too many windows open. That's not it. There we go. Okay, so this is a hymn to Agni, the fire, but as the sun, or as the power within the sun. And it points to a power even, as the essence of the fire that is the sun even. So it says, this is the conclusion of the hymn. It says, this sun, not far removed and unobstructed, whether looking downwards or looking up, is harmed by no one. What is the power by which he travels? Who has truly beheld him who, as the collective pillar of heaven, sustains the sky? But the words for pillar of heaven are diva, skamba. So skamba is this key word that becomes the symbol of the absolute in the Atharva Veda hymn, and it's here called the skamba of heaven. And it is that which upholds even the sun in the sky and the fire of the sun. So it's essentially identifying the skamba with Agni in a sense, but it's by its mystical questioning. It's even asking, like, what is the power that is within that, even because it says, let's see. Okay, previous line. Okay. Oh, here. Okay. Svadaya, right? Svadaya is, what is the power? What is the power? And this is the great question. Like, what is the power that upholds even the sun and, Agni as the sun? What is the power by which he travels? And that power is the skamba of heaven. But the word for power is svadaya. Svadaya means power, but specifically it means self-determination, self-determining power. Okay, so it can be interpreted as power, but in its literal specific meaning, it means sva. Sva means self, and daya is from this root word dha, and it means determination. So self-determination. So the point is, the power which underlies that, which is the skamba, or rather you could say the skamba, which is the absolute, has or is defined by the nature of self-determining. Okay, so it's like it's telling you a description of the nature of the skamba, is that it is the self-determination, self-determining power. That's interesting to me because it goes back to this question of, like, if the and this is where Shaivism takes it, basically. If the absolute is the unlimited, if its power is unlimited, essentially, the indefinite dyad is unlimited. If it's infinite or what have you, if there's nothing above it, then what determines what directs it, or so to speak, what directs it, determines it? Is it determined from without? If it's determined from without, then something else is determining it and is above and beyond it. If it's determined by its own nature, then that nature is self-determining in some way. Okay, so it's sort of a paradox, but the point is, that's kind of what svadaya means, is that it is that by its very nature, the absolute has to be self-determining, because if nothing is beyond it, then it has to be what determines, and therefore it's sort of like a reflexive power directed even toward the sva, toward the self. This is elaborated into things like svachanda. Svachanda means self-power, self-willpower even. Let's see if we can find svachanda. independent, spontaneous, acting according to one's own will. Okay, so it's like this, it's this image of the absolute. And of course, they call this Svachanda Bhairava. And Svachanda Bhairava is the ultimate supreme form of Shiva in some sects, of course, in some sort of esoteric Shaivite sects. And so this Svachanda, it's an elaborated version of Svadaya. It's like a synonym, but giving it a different color, right? And so that is describing the absolute as sort of a will, which is self-determining and which is the power of determination itself. And then there is a third word, which is Svatantria, very similar. Self-dependency, absolute free will, or divine sovereignty. And that again is the description of the absolute in Kashmir Shaivism, for example, is that it has or is identifiable with Svatantria, divine sovereignty, and that divine sovereignty is complete autonomy, right? And all of that. And then another word that goes in this group is Svayambhu, self-manifested and self-born even. So that's another possible connection, a little bit different, right? Okay, so I think this concept of like absolute spontaneity of the will that self-determines itself, this I think that's what the Rig Veda is telling us is the nature of the skamba. If you see in that, if you can read that into that line, what is this that is self-determination itself, of even the sun, and is the description of the skamba, which is the absolute. If that is the case in the Vedas, that could be what Enda, what the bird-like nature is pointing to, right? Because the bird has, it's incredible because it's this very rich symbol that could go a million different ways, could have a lot of interpretations. But it could connect to this concept of absolute self-determining spontaneity that is at the essence underlying the power of the absolute, okay? Because it cannot be determined by anything external, therefore it is the power that is this sort of this bird-likeness. It is cut off from the earth. It's like flying. It's like the power of flight. And as a package deal going along with that are these images of the bald silentness that is it's like cut, like Enda of Aaron. That's why I think he's a good symbol of this quality, at least in a human form. Okay, you should picture it as the nature of the absolute itself, but having like nothing external. He does, like Enda does not allow anyone to have, they don't have external fires. The fire has to be internal because that is the nature of the absolute. Okay, and he is characterized by being silent and bald because those are the symbols of being, not reliant, not conditioned or bound by any attributes or externalities. And from that arises absolute power and sovereignty, which is symbolized in Danwal Mahmud. Okay. Now, lastly, we should look at a couple of things. Maybe I'll go into more of these particular things. This will be kind of maybe a preview for if I get a chance to do another stream on this or whatever. But in the Irish tradition, you have this bird cloak. Okay, I think this is where this kind of goes, is that the bird nature, which is, as we can see kind of what it means, maybe like theoretically what this is pointing to. The nature of the absolute is to be this bird-like nature, actually, which allows the freedom and spontaneity, which makes power and determination possible. And that bird-like nature is sort of the ideal of the mystic, to become that bird-like nature, right? Because and it's the summit, the apex of the absolute. And so in the Irish tradition, we get this theme where we get this real life concept, this real life thing that was part of the tradition, which is the Tuigen cloak. Okay, so the Tuigen or Tuigen rather, sorry, ceremonial feather cloak historically worn by the elite class of ancient Irish poets known as the Fili, and especially the Olav, however that's pronounced, the chief poet. The chief poet, especially, okay, this is like the what is worn by the highest elite poet of poets. And of course, we know from records that the chief poet of Ireland would sit at the same table as the king and be seen as his equal, the equal of the king himself, essentially. And obviously, you can imagine cases in which the king would defer to the chief, rather the chief druid. If this would, like, we have records from like the time of Shakespeare where this was still the case. Okay, think of that, like from like the Renaissance and early modern period, and that was still the case in some case. There's at least some records of that. Imagine if it was the ancient times of the pagan times that the chief druid would hold that kind of level, and would in at least ceremonial cases might wear this bird cloak, and that this would potentially symbolize his being the embodiment of the absolute, and of this nature of the absolute potentially. Okay, that's where I think this kind of points. The bird, like the Enda nature, and that is the power that he wields. And this is obviously connects to like shamanic concepts where the shaman becomes one with the bird, and all of this stuff. You can go in those directions because the shaman is just one version of a type of priest, which the druid also is his own version of a mystic. And we have of course the hymn to the Keshen, the long-haired ascetic of the Rig Veda, book 10, where it is said that when you drink from the cup with the Keshen, that you fly, you become like you're flying with the gods. It literally describes them as flying, getting the power of flight and becoming one with the god, or uh, becoming on the level of the gods. And so this is kind of the feeling that I get from this, at least, that this links to this cloak of the high druid, high poet slash druid. Of course, the Fili and the poets are the descendants of what would have been the original priests and druids, as you can imagine. But yeah, it points to this concept. We know that the Brahmins in the Vedas, in the Vedic tradition, the Brahmins are the priest class. The name Brahmin connects, or the alternate saying of it, which is Brahmana. The Brahmana, it's a continuation of the name for the Brahman. The Brahman. So the Brahmana priest, the one of the priest class who is the Brahmana, he is the one who wields or identifies himself with, knows, is the living embodiment of the Brahman on earth. That's how the Vedic Brahmana class was seen, especially if you were the ultimate exemplar on earth, you would be seen in that way. I think that's kind of what the bird cloak might be pointing to as well, that the chief druid could be seen as this sort of bridge or embodiment of the bird-like quality on earth of the absolute itself, and that power. And that, of course, connects to the prophetic power. Prophecy is drawn from that power. But more than that, I think more than prophecy, any kind of, this has to be the power that underlies sovereignty as well. Has to be the power that underlies any such power. Okay. And would be the sort of the ideal of ultimate priestly power, at least in this instance. Okay. What else? I did want to go into Rig Veda 1.164, and that is it's 115. Okay, so Rig Veda 1.164.20 is a famous mystical line, and this whole hymn is incredibly mystical. Later in the hymn, it describes the mystical syllable on which both the gods and the rishis, which are the seers, sit, and that is a symbol of the absolute, of course, the akshara. It's called the akshara, just like the in Rig Veda 3.55.1. That is symbolically the pillar absolute, which is also the syllable, and it's the foundation of all. As you can see, the gods and rishis are sitting upon it. But in verse 20, it says, two well-feathered birds, yokemates and companions, embrace the same tree. Of those two, the one eats the sweet fig. The other, not eating, keeps watch. And then it says, where the well-feathered birds, never blinking, cry out for a share of immortality and for the ritual distributions, here the forceful herdsman of the whole living world, the insightful one, has entered me. That's the poet talking, me, the naive one. So the forceful herdsman of the whole world has entered him here. This is what I was kind of just describing. The sort of like the absolute power has entered the poet, the naive one. Then it says, just that tree on which all the honey-eating, well-feathered ones, those are birds, settle and give birth, they say has the sweet fig at its top. He who does not know the Father will not reach up to that. Okay, the Father, once again, it's referring to Tat, I think, the Father, which is the absolute. He who does not know the Father will not reach up to that fig, the sweet fig. Somehow this is the essence of bliss at the peak of the mystical tree. All right, so the point is there, this famous line says there are two birds, yokemates, they're yoked together, and companions on the same tree. One of them eats the sweet fig that's at the top, and the other, not eating, is keeping watch. So within the tradition, for example, I was reading Shankaracharya's commentary on this. He says that the one eating it is the Atman, the individual soul, and the one just keeping watch is the Brahman, the true absolute. And so within the Indian tradition, they interpret this bird who is detached from consuming as the absolute. Of course, we see Trivolnyath Treoker, who is the Briochen also. Trivolnyath Treoker, he's walking around with a branch of some berries and things, fruits, and he's living off of the aroma only while not eating them, right? Remember, but he then gives the seeds to plant the trees for the world from that. But he does not eat, but he lives on the essence. He lives on the aroma. The Atharva Veda 10.8 says that the Brahman / Atman is contented with the essence and desireless. Okay, these are the same things. And so, yeah, that would be like so this is implying that the one bird is the witness consciousness, in a way, a witness awareness. He's keeping watch, but not eating. While the soul, the Atman, is consuming the essence, is eating the fig, okay, on the highest level, while the other one is just like keeping watch. So that's an interesting mystical thing there. But what it points to is that the Vedics did have a concept of this bird-like nature of the Atman and the Brahman, that there are two levels of this bird-like nature. Okay, and and then in the following lines, it describes a bunch of other birds that are calling out for the honey and for the ritual distribution. It's like the other souls or the other whatever, what have you. The interesting thing here also is that within this long hymn, if you go into it, especially if you read Jameson and Brereton and their commentary on this from their translation, the bird is also, there's also a play in here where the bird is the sun or the fire or the essence of that fire, just like in the hymn that I read previously, where kind of the essence of the fire is that skamba svadaya, that determining power. Well, here at the beginning it says, let's see if I can find this. I got to run here pretty soon. Yeah, let's see. Well, in any case, it's in the earlier parts of this hymn. There is a play on the sun being Agni, and then that builds up to this bird passage where the bird really is a symbol of this same sun or the principle that's within the sun. Okay, and that's kind of why within the Indian tradition, this bird in this tree is identified with the Brahman, and as we saw, the Svadaya, the power within the sun, the power upholding the sun, and Agni is identified with the Brahman, also with the Skamba, which is the Brahman. Okay, so you can see these things kind of dovetail together. Which is a good word for it. Okay, and I'll have to branch off from there in another stream, because I think that's a good sort of concluding point that gives a preview of where you can kind of connect these dots. You then also can think of, the eagle in the top of Yggdrasil that has a rooster perched on it. Is that this same concept that we just saw? Or, is that eagle a lower echo of that within the world? Because it's kind of, Snorri describes it being agitated by the gossip of, or the words of Ratatosk and that sort of thing. So those are questions to think about. Does that bird connect? And I would love to go into whether, Thoth, I'll just pronounce it Thoth, of the Egyptian cosmology, is this sort of bird-like, this picture of the bird-like nature of the absolute, because there are multiple cosmogonies in the Egyptian tradition. One of them is Ptah or Ptah Nun, but from Hermopolis, I believe, there is another. Each center in Egypt had a different cosmology with a different god, kind of as the creator. It's the Amun one, there's different ones, and in one of them it is actually Thoth, and Thoth is the ibis bird, and there's this concept in the Egyptian material where the soul is called, one aspect of the soul is the Ba, and it is depicted as having a bird nature. Okay, but then there is the Ak. The Ak is the ultimate goal of you transfigure your soul into an Ak, a shining Ak, AKH, and that is depicted as a bird. And if you just Google AKH Ak Egyptian, it is a bird image, and the Ak goes to the Akhet. The Akhet is this transcendent immortality place of pure light. Okay, and that's like the goal is to make your lower bird soul get its wings and become Akhet, become the Ak, become an Ak, and to live forever. So it's this. So immortality is part of this. The shamanic pursuit of the absolute is to identify with that, to become immortal like it, and all of that. Okay, I have to run, and that's sad that I do, because there's a lot more you can connect this to, and I think anyone can kind of make those connections themselves as well. So if you don't have a chance to hear, if I go into this in the future, or if I don't have a chance to do so, you can kind of make those connections. I think yourself, there's a lot that can be dug up. All right, thanks for joining and listening today, and have a great evening. Thanks. Bye.